Hi, and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about what are the symptoms of grief. And I think most of us have experienced a loss of some kind in our life, whether it's been a loss in opportunity, whether it's been loss through something like a divorce, or even especially the loss of a loved one. We've all dealt with loss and grief in some way, and so today we're going to talk about the symptoms that you can watch for and then also help identify the 5 stages of grief that are common for people to go through. And we hope that by sharing these things, that whether you are struggling with loss in your life or that you're supporting someone else, that you'll have the tools and the awareness that you need to support them more fully as they work through grief.
As we studied the root meaning of grief, it was interesting to find that one of the associative words is heavy and like mental pain and sorrow. I think that's a good definition of the word,
For
but it is a
sure.
very heavy feeling, and it feels heavy in the body, wouldn't you say?
For
So
sure.
think about the heartbeat, and what would the heartbeat do in a state of grief? It would just be slow and heavy almost. I don't know, the heart kind of slows down and almost becomes non-existent at the beat of the heart, I think,
Yeah.
in a time of grief. um, I think about the breathing would be mm, like shallow, like but not, not able to get that deep breath, that feeling, that unable to get that deep breath. The eyes, of course, we would associate those with sad eyes, very sad, sad eyes. And any tension in the body, I think maybe the chest would feel very tight, maybe a lump in the throat. I know when my mom passed away, it was really hard to eat. I needed to eat foods that I could just swallow hard, because if it was
Yeah.
something I felt like I could choke, it was a lot of
Oh,
emotion
yeah.
in my
Oh, wow.
in my neck, as
Yeah.
while she was after she had passed for those first few weeks.
This may be a strange connection, but I was thinking about this the other day. Like when you have a sliver, how you're so careful to not, like a sliver in your foot, how you
Yeah.
try not to step on that because every single step would create that pain. And
Right.
it's almost the same with grief. It's like you've got that sliver in your heart,
Yes.
or that shard or that broken piece in your heart. And
Yeah.
and so you don't want to breathe. You don't want to
Right.
exhale. You're going to feel the pain
Yeah.
with every breath at times. And so,
That sounds so right. That's so true.
yeah.
Yeah. There are lots of different ways, though, that we experience grief, and it's not just from the death of a loved one.
Right, right. Even losing a job or losing an animal that you love, lost opportunities, like we mentioned. There are a lot of reasons that we encounter grief in our life, and so it's important to recognize what stages that we're going to go through as we work through all the emotions associated with that. So, we'd like to share with you the 5 stages of grief. The first stage is denial. The second stage then is anger. The third common stage is bargaining. The fourth is depression. And then finally, the last stage is acceptance. And we're going to talk about each one of these because I think each one's important to understand.
And it's important to understand that they don't necessarily go in order sometimes.
Right,
There can be,
right.
you can have a level of acceptance and then move into another state and have to re-accept again, I think.
Yes,
So it's
for
important
sure.
to honor where you go on the stage, the cycle of grief, and honor your own cycle.
Yeah. So, as we talk about denial, the first stage, often when we have that loss, that initial sense of shock, horror, those feelings of this can't be happening, this can't be true, this can't be real, um, those are some of the first feelings that often come up for us. And in that state, we we can often shut down a little bit. It's just our first line of defense to resist. This can't be. I don't want this happening. I don't want to deal with this or look at this. And people may have that response in a variety of ways, whether they just can't actually even connect to the message or the truth of what's happening, or whether some other emotion comes up. We talked about laughter.
Yeah, I had a friend who passed away in my senior year of high school. And when my friends came to tell me, I felt the need to laugh. And I said, I feel like I need to laugh. And it was really confusing to me. But I realized it was my denial. It was that section of grief where I was in denial. And that's how it presented itself physically outward, was with just needing to laugh.
Like you almost can't believe it.
Right.
Has to be a joke. It couldn't be true.
Yeah, that's exactly how it felt. Like they were teasing me, maybe even.
Yeah. So the second stage of grief is anger.
Anger is one that we need to be really patient with ourselves. You know, one of the reasons why we can go through grief too is maybe we have been diagnosed with a chronic illness.
Oh yeah.
Or you know, we've lost something that's been meaningful, you know.
Yeah.
And anger is one that will show up differently, and we need to honor and respect our own anger and the anger of others and let them process that. I heard an interesting interview with a woman who lived through the Holocaust, and she said something to the effect of, you get through healing, you had to go through anger to get through healing. And even she had to give herself the time to be angry. And anger is that we call it the secondary emotion, and that's so true, because the deep emotion is grief in this situation, but it's part of that grief.
Yeah.
And it's okay if people if the anger doesn't make sense either, because there are times when someone does pass away, sometimes people will have anger geared toward that person because they passed away, and it might not make sense logically, but it's a very logical part of grief, and it's okay.
Or you could be angry at God.
Right.
Or you could be angry at the other person if somebody was involved in that death. Or you could be angry at the person that got the job instead of you. Or, you know, there's a lot of, you could be angry at yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
The why me
Yes.
can be the anger part of that cycle.
Yes. And I love what you said about that anger is a secondary emotion, that grief is coming up first. But one of the reasons we become angry is when we feel out of control.
Yeah.
And then we get angry, and it makes us feel in control of something. And so I think that's important to realize too, that people struggling with grief, they are just grasping with this out of control feeling in their life that's so difficult to bear.
And that's one way to get through that.
Yeah.
That's so good. That's true.
Yeah.
We also have the third is bargaining.
Yeah, and I think this is the point where, you know, things are not going to change, things are not going to be different.
Yeah.
But now you're starting to doubt yourself or doubt God. You know, well, what if I had done this? Well, what if I had been able to do that? It's like you're trying to somehow get back. Reverse what has happened, and that can be such a difficult stage, because the guilt or shame or blame that we put on ourselves when we believe that there's something we should have or could have done to avoid the loss, I know that can be a really heavy load to bear. And for me, that's a point where I just have to go into trust, trusting myself, trusting my life path, the life path of others, trusting God, because sometimes there's just no way to make sense of what has happened.
I think both of those, bargaining and anger, you know, they each have the question, why me, or what if, you know, and those are questions, those are mental, those are questions of the mind. And so honor that the mind's moving and having those experiences. And if it seems like you can't pull out of that, that's when you bring the sensation down into your heart. That would be the easiest way, is to let that heart do the work, because when you're in your heart, then the trust can arise without much effort.
And there's a point too where maybe when you're done bargaining, that there will be a point of acceptance, and acceptance is a really important step, because it's hard to move past our difficult situations if we're continually resisting them or fighting against them or wishing it didn't happen or going. It's hard. What you resist will persist, and so to continue fighting the anger and the frustration, you will continue to get that anger and frustration, and so accepting will help bring you to maybe a point of resolve, or at least neutrality.
And in the meantime, sometimes we move into depression, and we have depression. And I think, how could you not, when you have a loss, even, and we got to give ourselves credit for when it's a loss of a job, or a loss of an opportunity, or something that we were excited about, and we get that disappointment and that grief. We need to be patient with ourselves and feel that, depression isn't always just laying in bed all day. Depression is just a depressed feeling. All of the emotions become depressed. They become less vibrant in our lives.
Yes.
And that's what depression is. And I loved when we were looking at these things, we'll talk about it more in the next video, but it's not that we will ever get over the grief. The grief doesn't go away. But we will be able to experience joy and happiness at a higher level as we heal from and work through our grief.
Yeah. And I know Robbie Parker is the father of Emily Parker that was killed at the Sandy Hook shooting, one of the 20 children killed there. And I just heard him speak last weekend, and he was saying that the grief for him just became shades and shades of gray, like you were talking about. And he distinctly remembers the first time that he was in a grocery store and someone came up and asked him if he needed help, and he was in another state. It wasn't anyone that knew him or what was going on, but he was looking down, and he said he looked up and he noticed that the clerk had this bright green, most beautiful green apron on, just their store clothing, and that was the first time he noticed color.
Oh wow.
And he recognized that it was the first time he was seeing color again. And I thought that was such a powerful
visual.
Yes. And so as we can move past the depression, then the final stage is moving into acceptance. And for you to be able to accept what has happened, to be able to be at peace, no longer fighting against the could-haves or would-haves or should-haves or what ifs, yes, and allow yourself to be resolved that this did occur, this was my life experience, and now from that point being open to learn and grow and create kind of a new experience. And there's a great podcast called Seeing Green, or it's not a podcast, it's a talk on Hope Works, and
it's so good.
We'll put the link below because I can't remember the lady's name, but she talked about how before her daughter's death, how the world was just all yellow. Everything she saw was yellow symbolically, and after her daughter passed away, that the world, it was like everything was blue. And she would try to go back into that yellow world and just didn't fit in. It didn't feel right. But to stay in that blue world didn't feel good either. And she said that she finally had to merge those two worlds together and see green in her life. And I thought that was such a beautiful analogy and a visual way to think about it. It's not that after grief or loss you're going to go back to your normal life or your old life. It will be a new life that's created, kind of woven in with the experiences of loss, and allow that to be okay too, that life may be different from now on, but it can also be beautiful.
So true. And if you are experiencing or going through grief or supporting someone who's dealing with grief, we send our love and affection to you. We are so grateful that you are willing to study and look outside and try and get some information
Mm-hmm.
on how you could make your life or your loved one's life better. We support you and send special prayers and love to you.
Mm-hmm. And just know that from our hearts we would pray that you will be surrounded in love, that you will feel the comfort and the warmth of the Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit in your life, that you will know without doubt that you are loved and that you are being watched over, and that at the Wholeness Network we care about you. And so please reach out to us if you need somebody to support you at this time, but that we know this is a sacred time in your life as you're walking through this valley of grief, and we support you with all of our hearts. And if you want to tune in tomorrow, our next episode is teaching you how to deal with your grief in a healthy way.